Ricotta is one of my favorite cheeses to make. It is a versatile cheese that can be either savory or sweet. Not only is it super easy, and it's another one of those cheeses that kind of makes itself, but the exact same recipe makes many different cheeses. So it's one of those recipes you just get in your mind and you are good to go. Ricotta was discovered by an Italian grandmother. The Italian grandmother was making mozzarella. Centuries ago, mozzarella was made outside on an open fire in a big pot. She made her mozzarella and she took the curd from the mozzarella to stretch and pull it and make mozzarella, which is really the big difference between mozzarella cheese and all other cheeses, is it's a stretched curd cheese. So as she was doing that, she left the pot of whey on the fire, and she realized when she looked over a little while later that that pot was about to boil over. All of a sudden she said, what is that on top? And still, centuries ago we were really cautious with food. Food was difficult to come by. She saw this beautiful foamy curd on top. Never seeing it before, she decided to scoop it up. She scooped up those curds and set them aside and went back to stretching her mozzarella. 20-30 minutes later, legend says, her husband came up and said, "What is this?" And she said, "I have no idea. I pulled it off that way." And he took a taste and said, "This is amazing. What is it?" And they decided to name it ricotta. Ricotta means to cook again or to recook in Italian. And it's the recooking of the mozzarella whey that makes ricotta. Unfortunately, in the United States and throughout most of the world now, it is just too expensive to make whey ricotta, because whey ricotta is very costly in that it takes 10 to 12 gallons of whey to make about a half a cup of ricotta. So when we go to the grocery store or anywhere else, pretty much all we see is something called whole milk ricotta, which we're going to make today. And whole milk ricotta is made by using the magical stuff citric acid. And you're going to start to think, wow, we talk about magical stuff a lot in this cheese making process, because it's truly what I feel, because you take this milk and 20-30 minutes later it's turned into cheese. So we're going to use the citric acid. Citric acid is really just lemons or limes. And we're going to add that, and that's going to be the acidifier that's going to kind of fake this cheese out and make it think that it's sitting in this huge vat of whey. So in order to make our ricotta, we use milk and cream. Ricotta is very creamy, so when you start making it at home, you're going to have this entire experience of this moist, creamy, smooth ricotta that you just don't find in the grocery store. But what you want to think about, just for a quickie, is that mascarpone is just cream, same recipe. Casablanca, just milk, same recipe. Cottage cheese, exact same recipe, but 2% milk. That's why this is such a great versatile recipe. But of course, we're going to make ricotta. So we're going to start with a gallon of whole milk. We need to use whole milk in our cheese making. When they say lower fat cheeses, they've taken more of the cream off the milk than the whole milk had, but definitely nowhere near the amount of 2% or skim milk. So if you try and use those, you're going to end up with very dry, crumbly cheese. So we're just pouring in a gallon of milk into our sterilized stainless steel pot. And of course, this could be glass or enamel. And now we're going to add some cream. The recipe calls for half a cup, but remember, all cream is mascarpone, no cream Casablanca, so we want to use a little more cream if you like it creamier, which I like my ricotta creamy. So we've got our milk and our cream, and we're going to use our up and down motion to help disperse that cream. So when we do this up and down motion, it's always, for gentle cheeses. We want to make sure we don't disrupt the molecular structure of the milk. But when we've got cream involved, we have to remember that cream's always rising to the top. So we want to keep that cream pushed down and dispersed throughout our entire milk. In addition, if we're cooking on a stovetop, which there's only about 5 cheeses we're ever going to cook on the stovetop, we have to be careful that we're not doing any kind of swirling, as that swirl is just going to keep this hot milk down here on the flame and the cool milk up here. So that's another great benefit to this up and down motion, doing a full disbursement of the milk above the heat. All right, so we've got that cream in, we've got cold milk. We're starting with completely cold milk and cream, and we're going to add our citric acid. Anytime you see citric acid in a recipe, and it is always going to be the first ingredient, you'll be using it with cold milk. And we're just going to put in a teaspoon of citric acid. I'm using cow's milk today because that happens to be what I enjoy with the taste of my ricotta, and in addition it's something that everyone can easily find. But if you were using goat's milk, rather than using 1 teaspoon of citric acid, you'd be using 2. Because again, we're always dealing with the molecular structure of the milk, and goat's milk, being naturally homogenized, does not separate as easily as cow's milk. It needs a little bit more push with the citric acid. So we've added our teaspoon of citric acid. We're going to stir that in. And now we're going to add a teaspoon of salt. The salt's going to help separate those curds and whey for us. In the end, when we go to taste it, we're not even going to taste the salt because it's really going to be left in that whey. We'll still have to salt it in the end as far as preserving and flavor. So we'll put a teaspoon of salt in, sprinkle that right in. Give it a stir, and now we're going to turn on our heat. Whenever we cook on the stove top, we cook all of our cheeses on medium heat. We don't want to go anything over medium, and if you go with low, you're going to be cooking a little too slowly. And what happens when you do that is you allow the citric acid to work too long, and it's going to cause the pH to rise too high. And we don't want to get all into that business because it gets a little complicated for the home cheesemaker, but just medium heat is the key. So we're going to go ahead and turn this on, get our medium heat. I'm using propane. A lot of people stress out, oh, I have an electric stove. No worries. The only difference you're going to have to worry about if you're on an electric stove is when you're done. At the time in which your cheese comes to the point of where you've reached the temperature you're looking for, you'll generally have to just pick it up and move it completely off that stove so it doesn't continue to cook. But other than that, you can cook on electric stoves. I've cooked on outdoor grills in barns, so you're good to go with your cheese making. All right, so we're going to let this cook up. It's going to go all the way up to 184 degrees. So what's going to happen is we've pretty much made this cheese. We don't even need this ladle anymore. We're just going to set this ladle aside. We're done with it. The only thing we're going to do, just like the Italian grandmother, is wait for the billowing of curds. However, we all know that cleaning scalded milk pans is terrible. We don't want to do that. So to avoid that, at about 165 degrees, and frankly, I don't even use a thermometer when I make this cheese. I just look for the small beginning of curd to form, which we'll be able to see in just a little bit. When the curd starts to form, just a very thin layer, it's going to come after that milk film, we're going to take our spatula, and we're just going to get in there and scrape the bottoms and the sides and give a good scrape so that we don't allow any scald. But here's a tip, very important. If you are a lazy scraper, if you do not remember to get in there and scrape, just forget it. Because if it's already scalded and you get in there and scrape that burned scalded milk up, you'll ruin your cheese. If you're not sure, just go into the far corner, do a little scrape. You'll feel it, you'll hear it. Do a little scrape and you'll see the brown, burned, or black milk come to the surface, and then you'll know it's too late. Just scoop that little bit out, but you're still good to go. You will lose about 1/3 of your cheese if you don't scrape, because those curds that have to rise to the top, they aren't going to be able to do that. They're going to stick down there and hang on to that scald. So it's very important that you try and remember to get in there and scrape. We're going to bring this cheese up to 184 degrees. It takes about 20 minutes. Once we get up there, it'll be the beautiful billowing of curd. We're going to put the top on it and set it aside, just like the Italian grandmother did. Set it off to the side, let it cool down for about 20 minutes, and you're ready to eat. Beautiful, creamy ricotta. So let's let it do its thing. And we have a little fun tip we're going to do here. Rather than wait and sit here and just stare at this, we're going to make some butter. So butter is super simple. There's absolutely no reason to buy butter at the grocery store. The only time I ever buy butter is if I'm making pastry, because much like everything else, there's an exact science to butter. So butter has a very specific amount of liquid content. And if you're making pastry dough or scones or something that really depends on the rise of your dough or your pastry, the extra butter and liquid content that's going to be off, that extra liquid in your butter will throw off your entire recipe. So we're going to start a really quick way with doing it right here at the counter with a bottle, just a simple water bottle, just like this. Butter only has one ingredient in it, and it's heavy whipping cream. That's it. Simple, heavy whipping cream. I've taken heavy whipping cream and I've put it in a water bottle. I love to use these water bottles for a variety of reasons. One, somebody always smacks them, drops them or something, and they're not going to break. Two, they have these agitators. These lines are natural agitators. Makes it very simple. Back in the old days, people would say, oh, I've shaken butter before. I'm not doing that. It took me 20 minutes and nothing happened. Now, we can make butter in 1.5 to 2 minutes. The other trick is the temperature of your cream. Your cream needs to be between 58 and 72 degrees. As long as it's between 58 and 72, you're ready to actually start making butter. If you put cold cream in there, you're going to have to wait until that cream warms up before you even begin the process. So we've got our water bottle, we put our cream in it, and we've let it warm up. So all we're going to do is shake. There's, of course, like everything else, there's the right way to do it and the wrong way. So the right way to do this is to do 1 solid shake per second. You're going to use your full shoulder up and down. And if you do that, you're going to make beautiful butter with very little buttermilk. And if you haven't ever made butter at home, you're not familiar with what's called sweet cream buttermilk. We don't sell it at the grocery store. Most people haven't had it. One of the benefits of making butter at home is the most amazing dieter's dream, sweet cream buttermilk. Sweet cream buttermilk is the liquid that's left from the butter. In the grocery store, what you find is something called cultured buttermilk, and that's where we take that buttermilk and we have to culture it with that man that walked across the desert, that mesophilic culture. We have to put that in it to make it last, because sweet cream buttermilk, no matter what we do, will go rancid in 8 to 10 hours. So you just get to use it right after you make your butter. It is amazing, sweet and creamy, yet all that fat has landed in your butter. So here's the trick. If you shake it like this, these short little just using your elbow, you're going to make too much buttermilk and not enough butter. So why do we worry about that? Because we've been doing this for centuries, and centuries ago we didn't have refrigeration. We knew, our ancestors knew the buttermilk would go rancid, so we wanted more butter. Butter could be stored in a cellar. Butter had staying power. So they realized that the slow motion, 1 good shake per second, would give the most butter and the least amount of buttermilk. So the first thing that's going to happen is the whole bottle is going to be coated, because the first thing you're going to do is make whipped cream. You know that great stuff we just put on top of desserts? That's the first thing you're going to make. And then all of a sudden you're going to be shaking away and it's going to stop moving. You won't hear anything, you won't see anything. You'll be like, is it done? It's not done yet. You'll know when it's done because you're going to start feeling this clunk, and you're going to see something that looks like this. It's going to look just like this, where you actually see the butter moving around inside. You'll give it a couple shakes and you'll see butter and the buttermilk. So we'll just give it a few more shakes till it gets as clear as possible and firm up that butter. It's going to take anywhere from 60 to 100 shakes depending on your arm strength. And now I think we've got it. See that beautiful butter in there? So what we're going to do, and you can see the buttermilk, how that last few shakes just brought that buttermilk out. So we're going to go ahead, give it one more shake, and see how we started. We started with our cream, and then we shook it a little bit, and it turned into basically whipped cream. See how thick it's getting in there, covering the whole container. And then about a minute later, we've got our beautiful butter that we've got to cut into. So we're going to take the top off, and we want to get that buttermilk. So let's take a look at this buttermilk that we have. And we'll just pour that. There you go. That's the stuff. All right. So now we've got our butter. We're just going to grab some scissors and cut into that. And there we go. Beautiful, fresh, preservative-free butter. I definitely think it's time to taste this. Oh yes, perfect. No salts on this, so we have to salt this. I know that I'm always talking about salt with cheese making, but of course remember, salt inhibits mold growth, it's going to help remove the whey. Well, it does the same exact principle with butter. It's going to help remove that buttermilk. So we're going to go ahead and add some salt to it. And that salt's going to, of course, flavor it because salt pops flavor and we love it. But it has to be in there. If you don't add the salt, your butter's going to go rancid about 8 to 10 hours. So there we have it, our perfect, wonderful, tasty butter. So we're going to set this aside while we go back and check on our ricotta because we've got to give it a little check, make sure we're not scalding on the bottom. And then we'll come back and finish talking about butter. So as you can see, we're getting just a little bit of curd development in here. There's a little bit of curd coming, a little film. Not enough curd to really cause a scrape, but if you see them starting to rise, those are curds. Those are little ricotta curds. So we're going to just give a scrape while we're here. There's nothing happening, which is exactly what we want. If I get in there and hear a scrape, that's when I start to get a little nervous. All right, you see how I'm using my dairy claws? I'm not putting these utensils right down on my counter. I don't want to worry about bacteria or dirt or chef surprises. So we're using our dairy claws. All right, we're going to clean up this butter and check back in on our ricotta in just a minute. Buttermilk can be used for so many things. This is not the buttermilk in the grocery store, you have to remember. Great in coffee, great with dessert, great on berries. Millions of things to do with the buttermilk. Of course, butter is the same way. We can compound butter, we can add Roquefort butter, Parmesan butter, salt, any kind of butter you want is perfect. I mean, one of my favorite butters is an applewood smoked bacon butter with chipotle. I mean, you can just sky's the limit. Just fold it in, honey butter, cinnamon butter, all different butters, truffle butter. Easy. As soon as you get to this stage where you have it right now, you just fold in the butters. I am so excited that we're getting butter, cream, and our ricotta is coming along. Let's take another peek. What you want to look for are these beautiful curds. See how thick they're getting? They're very close. Now we want to definitely, when we start seeing this, go in and see if we've got any scraping. That's that definite thick film curd on top. We're probably about 7 or 8 degrees away from being done. So we're just going to take a little peek at it, give it a second to finish rising. We don't want to stop it too soon. If you stop it too soon, your curd's going to turn kind of back into milk. Very creamy, no structure whatsoever. If you let it go too late, you're going to get a very coarse curd. It is one of those really what we call unforgiving cheeses, which means, you know, if you miss 184 and you cook it to 195, 200, you're still going to get ricotta. It's just going to be more like a grocery store ricotta, a little grainier. That 184 is going to give you that perfect, smooth, creamy texture. If you're down in the 170s, 176, 180, it's actually going to be too creamy and you won't be able to form a curd with it. So we're very close. Let's take a peek, see how our curd's just getting thicker and thicker. And we're just waiting for it to rise to the top. We've been watching this ricotta and waiting for that billowing of curds to show up, just like that Italian grandmother saw. And here they are. They were coming up, and we've gone ahead and turned off our heat immediately because there's about a second where all of a sudden you say, oh, look, it's going to boil over. That's when you turn off the heat. If I was on an electric stove, I would have picked it up and moved it down right off of that stove. Reach in and see this thick, beautiful ricotta. So we're going to put the top on it, set it aside, and let it rest where it's going to take about 20 minutes. It can actually hang out there for about 45 to 50, but it needs a minimum of 20 minutes so that the ricotta curds can continue to float to the top and cool down, because we're at our target temperature now of 184 degrees. But like I said, I do it the old school way and try and just take a look and see how it was meant to be made centuries ago. But it's probably pretty close to 184. Well, we've put aside that ricotta and now we're back to take a peek and see what it looks like. It's been sitting there for about 20 minutes. giving time for those curds to rise to the top and give us a good separation of curds and whey. The first thing we want to take a look at is to see if we have clear curds and whey. And so if we look in here, we can see that we absolutely have that whey coming up on the outside of the curds and the mass of curds right in the center. Exactly what we want to look for. We still have that beautiful big pillow of ricotta curds. So we are ready to scoop this out and, believe it or not, eat it. So we're going to reach in with our curd catcher. What you never ever want to do with ricotta is actually pour the curds out of the bowl with the hot whey. This is one of the only cheeses you'll run into this problem with, but the hot whey will actually melt and dissolve and break down the curds so that they're going to be such micro curds that they'll just go right through any sieve or strainer that you might be using. It'll even go through your mesh strainer bags. So you want to scoop in and remove the curds just like that from the whey. That is beautiful ricotta. So the first thing we're going to do is take a look and just say, okay, we've got nice, beautiful, fresh ricotta. Of course, this we could eat just like this is. We could change it. We could add, shallots, sauteed shallots, mushrooms, jalapeno, and stuffed shells with it. We could add vanilla, almond amaretto, and make dessert with it, or just something as simple as a savory little appetizer with crackers, which we're going to do. Just add some olive oil and salt and pepper and maybe a little basil. However, if I wanted to take this a step further, rather than eat it just like fresh ricotta, which is exactly what we buy at the grocery store, just cooled down, we can make something called ricotta salata. Ricotta salata is a fabulous round ball of hard grateable cheese for salads, very much like feta. It's the Italian's version, and it's just one simple step. I'm just going to tell you, we're not going to do it because it's so easy, you don't need to watch me. We'll just take that drain bag that you're going to use so much of your time and throw it in a colander, put your curds in there, salt them up with a teaspoon of salt, hang them overnight. 24 hours later, you have a beautiful, wonderful, round ball of ricotta salata, perfect for salad. So we're going to go ahead and mess with this here, though, because this is the really good stuff, in my opinion. So we first need to make sure we get that whey out of there, because remember, there's no whey in our cheese. So we're just going to move it around some, see the whey coming out. And then we're going to go ahead and just put this into a bowl. And we have, lots more ricotta. But we're going to set this aside and work with this. First thing we need to do is add some salt. Of course, we need the salt because it'll help strip out any remaining whey. It's going to inhibit mold growth. It's going to be a natural preservative and flavor. So we're going to sprinkle in some salt, some pepper. I like the pepper to be so that I can see it. It's one, this ricotta is so mild and so fresh that it really doesn't get overpowered by a good amount of pepper. This is one of those appetizers you can make in no time. The great thing about this recipe with ricotta is you could have made it with 2 cups of milk and a splash of cream. You don't have to make the whole recipe. You can divide it down all different ways and it works wonderfully. Just going to throw in some olive oil. Mix that in. This is one of those appetizers you can put out. Your kids will eat it. Grandparents will eat it. Everybody loves this. We're just going to throw it in the bowl. Top it with a little bit of pepper and a little more salt. Drizzle of olive oil. And some fresh basil. And we have a super easy, ready to serve appetizer of a fresh homemade cheese that we started 45 minutes ago. This is a perfect example of how you take milk, 45 minutes later, you're eating fresh, wonderful cheese. Incredible. I want to thank you so much for joining me here in the kitchen at Standing Stone Farms, and I really hope that you've got all the skills necessary to take the wonderful journey into cheese making. Please visit our website, standingstonefarms.com, where we sell all of the cheese making ingredients and supplies you'll need for your home cheese making adventure. Happy cheese making!